I'm Pedro da Costa, editorial fellow here at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, joined by Monica de Bolle to discuss Brazil's impeachment saga, which has finally concluded, come to some sort of a head as the Senate has voted for the impeachment trial to go ahead. Could you speak about the significance of the vote and some of the next likely logistical steps in the process?
Sure. So this seems like the beginning of the end for Rousseff's government. She has not been ousted exactly. She has been suspended by the Senate. So now what will happen is there will be a trial that is meant to take place within the next 180 days. That trial is presided over. It takes place in the Senate, but it's presided over by the Supreme Court. And at the end, if they do indeed find her guilty of crimes of responsibility, she will then be officially removed from office. She will lose the ability to have any kind of public appointment or run for office or anything of that sort for the next 8 years, and a number of other implications that come with that. I think the one thing that was very, very relevant about yesterday's marathon, and it really was a marathon, 24 hours of, senatorial speeches and the whole voting. Fanfare, and the whole thing actually taking place only this morning. It is telling that 2/3 actually of the Senate voted in favor of accepting the trial proceedings against her. They only needed a simple majority for this, but the fact that it was 2/3 shows us clearly, how weak this government actually is and how difficult it will be for Rousseff to survive the trial process.
So does that make it? Does that mean that she will likely be? That the process will end more quickly than it would have otherwise, given that political momentum?
Yeah, I think we can have those two interpretations here. So on the one hand, it being very, very difficult for her to survive. So in other words, that scenario where, the trial takes place and at the end of the day they find her not guilty. That seems very unlikely now. And the second thing I think that we can kind of draw out of this in terms of conclusions is that the process is likely to move a lot faster than the 180 days. And I think at least the sense I get from the way things are going in the country is that people want to wrap this up before the Olympic Games, and that's in early August, as we know. So
sure, that
it could be very quick indeed.
A very realistic and looming deadline. It'd be kind of strange for Brazil to have a leaderless country as it hosts the biggest sports event in the world. So let's move on to the new de facto president, President Temer. So he's had some time, of course, to prepare. He's known this was in the pipeline. It's not like this happened just in the last 24 hours. It's been long in the making. So what kind of an economic team in particular has he been putting together? And what are the likely policies that he's going to be pursuing right off the bat?
So Brazil's main challenge and main problem is fiscal. So the first thing that, the first order of business, I think, will be actually finding out how bad the fiscal situation is, and I'll speak about that in a second, but that will be his first order of business. He has already appointed some important cabinet members, so we already know who the finance minister is going to be. It's going to be Mr. Meirelles, who was the governor of the central bank under the two Lula administrations.
During the boom years.
So during the boom years, he will be the finance minister. Probably there will be some changes at the central bank as well. There will certainly be changes at the public banks, so the heads of the public banks in Brazil will change. And apparently Mr. Meirelles is the one who's going to be making those appointments. There's a new planning minister, there's going to be a new commerce minister, there's going to be a new foreign relations minister. It's not clear exactly how the responsibilities will be split, because one of the things that the vice president and now president has said over the last few days is that he intends to shrink Brazil's cabinet. We currently have about the number of cabinet positions down to something like 23, 24, depending exactly on how the negotiations go with the coalition. But the essence of the problem is fiscal, and that's the first thing that he's going to have to face. Now, there are a number of questions about how big the fiscal problem in Brazil is. I mean, we know that the debt to GDP ratio is increasing. We know that the economy has been running deficits for quite a few years now, at least 2, probably 3 this year, probably 4 if we have another deficit next year, and are unable to find, very quick short-term measures to reverse that.
Right.
That's very hard given the current environment of, just a very deep recession and rising unemployment and everything else.
But you've also flagged that in addition, there might be kind of shadow risks from the public banks.
Well, that's the issue.
Unknown,
I mean,
right?
there are a number of contingent liabilities that are very fast going to become not contingent, but actually real liabilities.
Implicit guarantees have become explicit, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. So on the part of public banks, for instance, there is already growing evidence that at least one of those banks, the mortgage bank in particular, might need to be recapitalized. Caixa Econômica. We don't know how much, but what the amounts would be, but certainly that's going to add to the debt. There are state-owned companies that are going to need government support. There's an electric power company, Eletrobras, that is certainly going to need cash injections from the government because that company is really suffering quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
There are also questions about Petrobras, whether Petrobras is going to need such cash injections. Petrobras has a very, very, very fragile financial situation right now.
They just borrowed a bunch of money from China.
They did, but they will run out of cash by 2017, sometime early 2017. So they may need a cash injection very quickly as well. And
How does the Brazilian public feel about injecting cash into a company that is at the center of a corruption scandal?
That's to be seen.
Yeah.
The other issue is the subnational finances and the what's happening with the state. Many states in Brazil, including the state of Rio, the state that's hosting the Olympics, they're under severe financial stress. A lot of them have not been paying public servants on time and have been delaying salary payments and wage payments and benefit payments. They had already been after the government for some kind of debt renegotiation agreement or even some debt relief. So President Temer will have to face that, and will have to face that as one of his first orders of business as well.
Yeah.
The measures that he's been talking about implementing, I mean, we will know more in the coming days as he makes these announcements, but apparently there will be a push for Social Security reform. Apparently there will also be a push for constitutional amendments that allow budget execution in Brazil to become more flexible. We've talked about this issue here before.
Because there's so much that's allocated to the states constitutionally that there's very little flexibility.
Well, there's that, and there's also the fact that expenditures there are certain constitutionally mandated expenditures that you cannot cut.
Yeah. And
there are also some constitutionally mandated indexation mechanisms on expenditures that you cannot change unless you pass a constitutional amendment.
An embedded inflationary pressure. Basically.
Exactly. So you need to break these things, and you need to break off with these problems that currently make the budget very rigid. And I expect that this will be one of the first things that he's going to try to do. If he's successful at doing that, currently it seems like he might be, because as things are organizing themselves in Brazil, he appears to have a majority in the Congress, and a majority that would be sufficient to pass these constitutional amendments. Constitutional amendments in Brazil need 3/5 of the vote. Mm-hmm. It seems like he has 2/3. We will know in the coming days. But if he manages to pass these things through Congress, that will be seen as a huge achievement, given that Brazil hasn't passed anything through Congress in the last year and a half. You know, it's just been complete gridlock.
But as far as to close out, as far as the broad economic outlook, even as we head into the Olympics, you don't see the prospect of a turnaround anytime soon, even if these reforms are implemented, right? We're talking about a long-term recovery from one of the deepest recessions in Brazilian history. Basically.
Exactly. I mean, there are still severe structural problems to be resolved. The reform agenda is huge. I mean, we're talking here about very deep Social Security reform, very deep labor market reform, very deep financial market reform. You know, you name it, and there's a reform in Brazil that you need to do. So in essence, you know, this is what actually dealing with these problems is what would put Brazil on a sustainable growth path. that's years of work, and it will take, you know, the groundwork may actually begin in this government, but we'll only see real progress, I think, in the next government after the 2018 elections. So for now, I'm betting that all we'll see really is a relief rally from markets, and perhaps, you know, some, depending on how the situation evolves from here on out, some international flows coming into Brazil, as of course, you know, foreign companies that have been sitting on the sidelines and waiting to invest again in the country see the possibility of Brazil being a little bit better off in the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.